It was an ordinary night, like so many others. I was leaving work tired, with my head full of problems, and the only thought that accompanied me was the desire to get home and rest. The light rain wet the deserted streets, while the streetlights seemed to flicker in the icy wind. That's when I saw him. A boy sitting on the curb, huddled with his arms crossed around his body. He seemed so small, so out of place in that gray setting. His clothes were dirty, his shoes worn, and his gaze. Something in that gaze caught my attention. It wasn't just hunger or cold. It was as if he carried a weight that no one should carry, much less someone so young. For a moment, I hesitated. We pass by so many people every day without really seeing them. But something inside me insisted. I walked up to him, and in the calmest voice I could manage, I asked, "Hey kid, are you okay?" He just nodded. He didn't ask for anything, didn't say a word. He just kept looking at the ground, as if I were invisible. But there was something about that scene that I couldn't ignore. I saw a bakery open across the street and decided to buy him something. I came back with a fresh loaf of bread and a small juice, handing it to him without expecting anything in return. He looked at me in surprise, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. He took the bread with trembling hands and began to eat, slowly, almost savoring each bite. As he chewed, he mumbled something. It was so low that I almost didn't hear it. She liked that too. I was confused. She? Who was she? Before I could ask, he stood up and, with a simple "thank you," disappeared into the darkness of the street. I stood there, staring into space with that phrase echoing in my mind. It was just a piece of bread, but for some reason, it seemed like it meant so much more. That night, I went home trying to forget what had happened. But the image of the boy wouldn't leave my mind. It wasn't just hunger or physical fragility that bothered me, but that enigmatic comment. She liked that too. Who was she? What did he mean by that? Despite the questions, I tried to continue with my routine. I woke up the next day, had my coffee, and got ready for work. Still, something kept pulling me back to that moment. It was as if a part of me needed to know more about that boy and his story. At the end of the workday, I decided to retrace my steps. The same neighborhood, the same street, hoping to find him again. But when I got there, he wasn't there. In the place where I first saw him, there was only the silence of an empty street. I started walking, looking around, looking for any sign of him. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a small trail of flowers scattered on the ground, as if someone had left petals along the way. They were white, delicate, and looked recent, still intact, even with the wind and the light rain that was falling. Without understanding why, I followed those flowers. The trail led me to the gate of an old cemetery, a place I knew well but had avoided for years. There was something almost poetic about the scene, the petals guiding the way to a place so full of memories and stories. As I walked through the gate, something inside me felt uneasy. The cemetery was empty except for a figure in the distance. It was him. The boy was kneeling in front of a grave, his head bowed, holding a flower in his hands. My heart raced. What was he doing there? And why did I feel like this was more than a coincidence? For a moment I stood still, watching from a distance. The boy seemed so small, so vulnerable in front of that grave. Something about the scene gave me a strange feeling, as if I was about to discover something that would change everything. I approached slowly, trying not to scare him. As I got closer, I began to see the details of the grave. My heart froze the moment I read the name engraved on the tombstone. It was her name, the name of the woman I loved more than anything, but who had been gone for years. my ex-girlfriend. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I couldn't understand what was happening. The boy seemed so oblivious to my presence, lost in his own thoughts. He held a simple flower, which he carefully placed on the grave. I gathered my courage and said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" He turned slowly, looking at me with the same eyes that had intrigued me the night before. There was no surprise on his face, just a disconcerting calm. "I used to come here when she was alive," he replied, his voice low and heavy with sadness. "She was always good to me. She helped me when no one else would." My legs almost gave out. I didn't know she did that. In the time we were together, she never mentioned helping anyone like that, but it made sense. That was exactly what happened. The kind of thing she would do, even without fanfare. I tried to piece together the words. Did she matter to you?" The boy shook his head slowly, looking at the grave. "She called me her little angel. She told me I deserved better, that the world didn't have to be so cruel." A lump formed in my throat. Memories of times with her came flooding back, mixing with the reality before me. I couldn't believe that even after so many years, she was still touching lives, even those of a stranger I'd met by chance. As I listened to the boy's words, my heart seemed to beat faster than ever. Here I was, standing at the grave of the woman I'd once loved, discovering a side of her I'd never known. Each word he said felt like a piece of a puzzle finally coming together. I tried to keep my voice from shaking as I asked, "Did you know who I am?" He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a mix of curiosity and recognition in his eyes. "I didn't know until I saw you yesterday." He hesitated for a moment, as if considering whether to continue. "She had a picture of you. She showed it to me once and said, 'You were the love of her life.'" My breath caught. Each word he said was a direct blow to my heart. I never imagined she would talk about me to anyone, much less to a boy she helped. It was as if somehow she wanted this connection to exist, even after so much time. I looked at the grave, and tears began to well up without me being able to hold them back. I remembered how our relationship ended, how I let her go without ever really understanding how special she was. Now, this boy was showing me that she was still amazing, even when I was no longer by her side. "Why did you come back here?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He looked at the grave and then back at me. "Because yesterday when you gave me that bread, it was like I felt she was there again. It was the kind of thing she would do, and I just wanted to thank her. And you." Those words disarmed me completely. A simple piece of bread, something so small, had become a link between me, him, and her. It was as if somehow she was still watching over all of us. I stood there beside the boy, in silence for a long time. Looking at her grave now wasn't just sadness. It was a mix of pain, regret, and gratitude. I had lost the chance to be better for her while she was alive, but perhaps now, with this boy, I could honor her memory. As the silence filled the space between us, something inside me shifted. The pain I felt wasn't just for what I had lost, but for what she left for the world. Kindness, compassion, and hope, even in difficult times. I looked at the boy, trying to imagine how she had found him, what she saw in him, and how she had managed to touch his life so deeply. I decided to ask, "Did you know her for long?" He nodded slowly, looking at the ground. "Not long, but the time I spent with her changed my life. When I had no one she was there. She always showed up with a smile and something to eat. She talked to me like I mattered, even when I felt invisible to the rest of the world. Those words hit me hard. I remembered how she had this unique way of making people feel seen, heard, and valued. It was one of the things that made me fall in love with her. The boy was further proof that her love for others remained alive, even after our lives went their separate ways. I tried to understand more about their relationship. Did you come here with her? Yes. She said this place was special to her because here she could talk to the people she loved who had already passed away. Now, I come here to talk to her. My chest tightened. I never imagined that she would share so much of her life with someone who, in the eyes of the world, was just another street kid. But to her, he was more than that. He was someone special, someone who needed love, and she gave it to him without expecting anything in return. I had the feeling she had planned it all, as if she knew that somehow our lives would intersect again through him. It was as if that boy was her last message to me, a reminder of who she was and what mattered. I looked at the boy with new purpose. Do you have a place to stay? He hesitated, shrugging. I'll sleep where I can. Those words hurt me, but at the same time, they gave me direction. I knew what I needed to do. She had taken care of him while she was alive. Now it was my turn to continue what she had started. As we walked together out of the cemetery, a whirlwind of emotions washed over me. The silence between us was not uncomfortable, but charged with meaning. It was as if, even without words, there was a mutual understanding of what we were going through. When we reached the sidewalk, I stopped and looked at the boy. He seemed so fragile and at the same time, so resilient. It was impossible not to think about what she saw in him and why she decided to help him. She always had that look in her eyes, the ability to see what others ignored. As I reflected, memories began to flood back. She and I sat in that same cemetery, talking about life. She always talked about how the world needed more empathy, more people willing to lend a hand. I used to laugh, calling her an idealist, but now, seeing the impact she left, I realized I was wrong. She wasn't just an idealist, she was practical. She turned her words into actions. The boy looked at me, interrupting my thoughts. Are you okay? I took a deep breath, trying to clear the lump in my throat. I'm just thinking about her. He smiled slightly, something rare for someone so young and with so many scars in her life. She spoke of you fondly. She said you had a good heart, even if you didn't show it sometimes. That sentence took me by surprise. I never knew she thought that way, especially after everything that had happened between us. But somehow hearing that from the boy felt like a second chance. A chance to be better, to honor what she saw in me. Without thinking twice, I said, "From now on, you don't have to sleep on the streets. We'll take care of this together." He looked at me in surprise, as if he hadn't expected to hear that. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to refuse. But then, with a shy nod, he accepted. As we walked to a nearby cafe where I could buy him something hot, I felt something change inside me. The guilt and regret began to give way to a new feeling, that I could do something meaningful, not only for him, but for myself, and most of all, for her. Sitting in the small cafe on the corner, while the boy enjoyed a hot meal, I took in every detail. He ate carefully, as if he was afraid it would end too soon. Her gratitude was evident, but what touched me most was how similar that moment was to something I could have experienced with her. It was as if somehow she was there, guiding every step. After he finished, I asked softly, "What's your name?" He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure if he could trust me. Miguel. Miguel. The name seemed simple, but it carried enormous weight now. He was more than just a street kid. He was her legacy. Something inside me knew that helping Miguel was more than an act of kindness. It was my chance to right the wrongs of the past and perpetuate the love she had spread throughout the world. I made a decision right then and there as I watched him. Miguel, if you want, I can help you get out of this situation. I want you to have a chance to start over. His eyes widened in surprise, almost incredulity. You would do that for me? Yes, not just for you, but for her. Because I think that's what she would want me to do. Miguel smiled, the first genuine smile I had ever seen from him. It was as if, in that moment, he believed the world could be a better place. And for me, it was the first time in a long time that I had felt something like that. As we walked out of the cafe, I made a plan in my mind. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to do whatever it took to help Miguel. He needed more than a roof over his head. He needed someone who believed in him, just as she had. In that moment, I realized something important. The impact of someone's life never completely disappears. She was gone, but the love and kindness she left behind lived on. Miguel was proof of that. And now, it was up to me to continue that story. As we walked together toward a new beginning, something inside me clicked. It was as if I finally understood the true meaning of the love she had spread. She didn't need to be physically present to continue changing lives. Her legacy now lived on in Miguel, in me, and perhaps in the many other people she had quietly touched. Before we said goodbye that night, I looked at him and said, Miguel, this isn't just about helping you. It's about learning from you too. You've reminded me that acts of kindness can change everything, even when they seem small. He smiled shyly, but with a sparkle in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I knew that together, we could turn the pain of the past into something positive. It didn't matter how difficult the path was, because now I understood what she had tried to teach me my whole life. Love is an act that multiplies. And it was with this in mind that I decided to share my story with the world. Not just to honor her, but to inspire others. Because in the end, this story isn't just mine. It's not just Miguel's. It's about all of us. So now I ask you, how many times have you ignored the opportunity to change someone's life with a simple gesture? What if you could make a difference in someone else's story? This story doesn't end here. It's just begun. I want you, who have listened this far, to be inspired to take action. Help those in need, no matter how small the gesture may seem. And if you have a story to tell, something that changed your life or someone else's, share it in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone needs to hear.